Today, I'm going to be showing you what's all inside this $250 modded Dell Optiplex, and just so you guys know, there's a graphics card in here that I've never featured on the channel before, and I got it at a pretty good deal. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. Today we're going to be checking out all the parts that I used in my $250 modded Dell Optiplex, and then of course, we're going to benchmark it. And if you're new here and you want to see a ton of other Dell Optiplex or PC building videos, then hit that subscribe button down below and also that notification bell. That way you never miss an episode. But yeah, let's check this thing out. To kick things off, let's first start with the parts list, how much I paid for everything, and talk about why I chose these parts specifically. The first one up is definitely the heart and soul of this build, the Dell Optiplex 3010, and this is one of the most popular OEM desktops to start a gaming PC with. This specific model that I have cost me exactly $100 off eBay, and it came with an Intel i5-3470, which is definitely a capable CPU for gaming, and it's also packing 8GB of DDR3 RAM. As far as the mods go, you've probably already seen it at this point, but if you haven't, I literally just uploaded a dedicated video on how to mod this Dell Optiplex to look like this, and it only cost me $21. The plexiglass sheet for the side panel only cost me $11 at Home Depot, and I also only paid $10 for these cheapo single color Molex lights off Amazon. Next up, we have the power supply. In here, I actually had to get a bit beefier than normal with a 550 watt EVGA M1, and I personally paid $40 for this off Newegg. Usually with these Dell Optiplex builds, I'm putting in a 400 or 500 watt power supply because we're usually using a modern and power efficient graphics card, but the GPU that we're about to talk about in just a minute is a little bit more power hungry. Saving that GPU selection for last, the next part up was storage, and for this build I decided to go with a 500GB ADATA SU635 SSD, and if you're following this as a build guide, you'll definitely have to make a judgment call for this one. If you're just storing some games, then 500GB is probably plenty for your first gaming PC and you'll get the benefit of a faster SSD, but if you don't think that's enough, then maybe you want to start with a smaller SSD and a bigger and slower HDD, but it really comes down to your budget. I ended up paying $46 for this ADATA SSD new off Amazon, and that's honestly a really tough price point to beat even on the used market, so that's why I went with the new one. And honestly, I really only went with this one specifically because this was the cheapest one on Amazon. Speaking of cheap, the last part that you've all been waiting for is the graphics card reveal. Remember, I've literally never shown this one on the channel before, and this here is the MSI 2GB GTX 770, which a coworker recently sold to me for just $40. If you look on eBay for completed sold auctions, you'll find this card going for anywhere between $40 and $60, but just note this wouldn't be my absolute #1 pick for a GPU in this kind of build. Like I said, I've never featured this GPU on the channel before, so I thought it would be fun to use. At just $40, it allows us to keep our build under $250, which is an absolute steal and a half if you think about how much value you're getting. But if you can spend a couple extra bucks, maybe up to $300, then I would definitely recommend upgrading the GPU first. With all that out of the way, here's what the final parts list is looking like, and like I said, this is some pretty dang good value for just $250, and I don't think I've ever actually made a gaming PC build at this price point before. All of these deals are super easy to find, especially all of the new parts, and now let's get into benchmarking this thing. For today's benchmarking run, I have 6 games for you guys. Sorry, I really tried to make it 7 with PUBG, but the servers were down at the time of testing, and just so you know, the settings that you're about to see for each game are the settings that I would personally recommend if this was my system. The first game up was Fortnite, and here I found a good balance at 1080p and medium settings with a locked 100% resolution scale, and I got a solid FPS average of 110. Keep in mind that if you're gaming with the 60Hz monitor, I would definitely recommend locking your frame rate at 60, and that'll really boost up these lower 1% and 0.1% lows. Following that, I tested Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Once again, I would recommend locking your FPS if you're at 60Hz, but here with an unlocked frame rate at 1080p and high, I got an average FPS of 132. Next up was the Rainbow Six Siege built-in benchmarking tool. This one is always running buttery smooth even on these super budget builds, and here in 1080p and very high settings, I got an average FPS of 80. After that, I tested Rocket League, keeping these initial games on the easier to run end, and here in high quality settings, I got an average of 159 frames per second during an online match. Getting into the tougher to run games, I tested the Far Cry New Dawn with the built-in benchmarking tool, and here in 1080p and low settings, I averaged 46 frames per second. This one was definitely maxing out our 2GB GTX 770 to its limit, at least without an overclock, mind mind you, but the 46 FPS was pretty smooth and definitely playable. Finally, the last game I benchmarked was the new MODDED. I was super hyped for this game when it first launched and even made a dedicated benchmarking video on it, and with this in 1080p and medium settings, I actually squeezed out just above our target 60 FPS mark, which is pretty impressive. Overall, this $250 gaming PC can definitely handle the easier to run esport titles in 1080p and at least high settings, which is perfect for a lot of you, but even with the newer and tougher to run games, it's still playable with low to medium settings in 1080p. One thing that I wanted to mention before wrapping up this video is, like I said, I've made a ton of other Optiplex gaming PC build guides before, and if you haven't seen them, I would really recommend checking out this one because in one single video, I compared all of the price points at $150, $200, and $300, so I think that's going to be pretty useful for you new budget builders. Well, that wraps up my $250 gaming PC build guide with my modded Dell Optiplex. As always, drop a comment down below about what you're thinking about this build or what you would do to change it. After that, feel free to head on over to one of these two videos if you haven't seen them yet, and definitely hit that subscribe button because coming up next, we're bringing back the Xeon. You don't want to miss that video.